Hello and welcome to WePC Benchmarks. My name is Seb and today I'm taking a look at the newly released New World. We did a benchmark over the beta, but since then I'm sure there have been changes to the game's performance, and I can assure you that there have. With the massive queues to get into the game, we decided to split the benchmark into two by doing Nvidia and AMD separately. Mostly because I managed to get all of Nvidia benchmarks done in the morning before everyone woke up and actually wanted to play the game. So for the benchmark, I set the game to very high settings with all sorts of caps off, but that didn't solve the issue I was having, which is that the game does not use the high-end GPUs to the max, meaning they are now artificially capped and don't perform to their maximum capability. Reinstalling drivers and trying to find other solutions, I couldn't find anything, so I just had to take it how it was. I did the benchmark in a fairly populated town where people said they always had issues, and checked the performance there. We start off with the 3090, and as you can see it's only being 38% utilised at 1080p, and so we only get an average of 63 FPS, with a 1% of 35 and a 0.1% of 27. Then at 1440p it averages 56 FPS, with a 1% of 29 and a 0.1% of 28. And then at 4K we get an average of 59 FPS, with a 1% of 34 and a 0.1% of 30. So with this utilisation you can expect 60 at all resolutions with the 3090. Then we have the 3080. And at 1080p, it's at 36% utilisation, with an average of 64 FPS, with a 1% of 7 and 0.1% of 7 as well. And moving up to 1440p, we get an average of 63 FPS, with a 1% of 20 and a 0.1% of 25. And then at 4K, we get an average of 62 FPS, with a 1% of 34 and a 0.1% of 27. Next up is the 3060 Ti, and at 1080p, it is also averaging 63 FPS, with a 1% of 35 and a 0.1% of 30. Up to 1440p, and the game averages 59 FPS, with a 1% of 35 and a 0.1% of 28. And then at 4K, we get a card that finally is being 99% utilised, and it averages 45 FPS, with a 1% of 33 and a 0.1% of 28. Moving on to the 2070 Super, and at 1080p it is averaging 60 FPS, with a 1% of 34 and a 0.1% of 31. Then at 1440p, it averages 59 FPS, with a 1% of 27 and a 0.1% of 21. And at 4K, it averages 39 FPS, with a 1% of 32 and a 0.1% of 28. The next GPU is the 1660 Ti, and at 1080p, it averages 62 FPS, with a 1% of 35 and a 0.1% of 30. At 1440p, it averages 45 FPS, with a 1% of 33 and a 0.1% of 24. And at 4K it averages only 24 FPS, with a 1% of 21 and a 0.1% of 12. Next up is the 1050 Ti, and at 1080p it averages 29 FPS, with a 1% of 24 and a 0.1% of 24. Then at 1440p it averages 18 FPS, with a 1% of 7 and a 0.1% of 7 as well. And at 4K, well, I couldn't actually do 4K with this card, as it kept timing out on the main menu when I tried to join. Lastly, we have the 1030, and I could only test it at 1080p, where it manages to squeeze out 10 FPS, with a 1% of 6 and a 0.1% of 6 as well. So there you have it, New World benchmark for Nvidia GPUs. Interestingly, there seems to be some sort of FPS cap where even the top end GPUs are being limited to not much over 60 FPS. Even with all the options in-game and outside set to uncapped. So I'm not sure what is going on there. Hopefully it gets patched, or it might just be a safety net, after the game was being accused of bricking a few 3090s during the beta. They did patch it with a 60 FPS cap in the menu, so maybe something similar is in place for in-game. Anyways, thank you for watching. Hopefully I'll have the video for AMD GPUs done soon, but in the meantime, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.